Hi, welcome back. Today we've got another demo about DataOps. Today's demo is going to be about Databricks. So the idea here is exactly the same as we had with Data Factory. What we're going to do is we're going to have a Databricks workspace for development purposes. This is where you're going to use feature branches in Git. You're going to write some code, then once you've saved it and you commit it, do a pull request. That's going to kick off a build process in the collaboration branch where all of our code merges together. That collaboration branch build is then going to produce an artifact. This artifact is going to contain the notebook. Normally we would be using things like libraries as well and deploying those, but just for the simplicity of showing the workflow around Databricks, today we're just going to concentrate on notebook deployment. The same exact methods would work with libraries and stuff, so that may be coming in a later video, but for now you can absolutely work out how to do that from this demo. Then we're going to take that artifact, we're going to have a release pipeline. In the demo today we're just going to have a single staging area which is going to be testing. In your production environment you'd also have QA or pre-prod, and you'd have a production, so you'd have multiple release stages. These I've shown in a screenshot at the bottom of the instructions on the site. We're then going to push the notebook into the Databricks workspace. In this instance I'm using the same workspace just because it's easier to deploy one, but the way that this works, you could just deploy a second, a third, a fourth in different environments with different tokens to achieve this. The demo today is also going to use Azure Key Vault. This is so that we're not storing the access token in the PowerShell script that we're using to deploy the notebooks. So this is kind of a best practice way of storing those credentials. It does mean that you have to rotate those credentials every now and then, and you need to understand how to use these things. That may be the subject of another demo another day, but for today this is a nice secure script that should do everything that you need it to do right out of the box. So with that, enjoy the demo, and let me know in the comments below if there's anything else that you'd like to see on the channel. Also, please hit that like button, make sure you subscribe so that you see any new demos as they come along, and hope to see you next time. Thank you. So first things first, if you log into your Azure portal, and we're going to create a key vault. The key vault is going to hold the token for Databricks so that we don't need to store that in the script file within Azure DevOps. So give your key vault a name, set up a new resource group for the demo. In this case I've used DataOps, and I've just gone KV with the current date in reverse order. That generally gives you availability of a name even when things need a public name. So I've shown this access policy side. That configures who is allowed to get keys and put keys and that kind of stuff within the key vault. For the time being I've set that just to myself. In a production environment you'd probably want to set that to the team or whoever's in charge of the key vault. And later on we'll enable Azure DevOps to have access to. So once that's done, start creating an Azure Databricks workspace. So again, choose that same resource group. I've used ADB and the current date for the name. Choose the location. I always use East US just because everything is nice and available there. So once that's validated, click create. We don't really need to set up many settings for this. This environment isn't going to really do anything. It's just there so that we can use the Git integration for the demo. So then go over to Azure DevOps and log in and create yourself a new project. Again, I'm using the DataOps name, setting it to private here. Probably you'd be setting it to enterprise in a real environment, just so that other people have got access to them. And then we're going to click on repos and just initialize that repository with a button at the bottom with a readme. This allows us to then use the repository for other stuff. Once that's done, Hopefully your Databricks is created by now. Just log into the workspace. That takes a second or so to log in. And once you're in, click on your user icon at the top and go to user settings. This is where we configure the Git integration. I'm just showing you on the screen here. You can use GitHub, and that will require a token. You can use Bitbucket, but we're going to use Azure DevOps. So click on Home or Workspace and create a new notebook. And here we're going to create one called Demo Notebook. We're going to choose Python just because the code is set up for Python. You can change that, obviously, to the language of your choice. Just be a bit careful about using the scripts that I've provided, because the release script does actually specify Python. So then we're going to click on the Git integration and click Link. Go back into your repository and copy that URI and paste it back into here. For the branch, we're going to create a new branch called Feature Branch. So just type a name in there and then a Create Branch button appears. Hit Create and go, and then the notebook will be synchronized, and we just put in a comment. Here we're going to say init feature branch and click Save. And that does a commit of this notebook into the repository so that it's captured within Git. We then hide the revision history, and we're just going to type in a comment. The only reason we need something here is to show that it's the same notebook going between the environments. So don't worry about what you're typing here, just make sure it's unique. So once we've done that, we're going to click Save. We're going to make sure that also commit to Git is ticked. You don't necessarily always want that ticked, because sometimes you're just working locally, and that's fine, just leave it. But do commit when you've done some actual work. So we're showing here now in the master branch there is no code. In the feature branch is the commit that we've just done, obviously, so click on that and we can see that code that's been written. It does say Databricks notebook source at the top. That's not visible in the notebook, but don't worry too much about that. We can then create a pull request by clicking that link within Databricks. That will just launch the portal. There's nothing stopping you doing a pull request from within DevOps. Just give it a name, make sure that the from and to branches are set correctly, and click Create. In this instance, we're just going to approve it, and then click Complete. Obviously, you'd have some workflow around that in your final environment. So when we complete the merge, by default, that's going to remove that feature branch. You'd then want to go and configure your Databricks to use a different new feature branch, but here we can now see that master has got the code in it, and the feature branch has disappeared. So now we're going to configure the key. So back into our user settings, go to access tokens and generate new token, name it Azure DevOps or something relevant in your environment, and click generate. You must copy this key while this box is up on the screen. It's never going to be shown again. So we're going to go back into our resource group and go into the key vault and click secrets, generate an import, and we're just going to give that a name of Databricks, and we're going to paste the value in there. This is going to then store the value so that we can request it, but we've got to have permission to request it so that people can look into the Git repository. They won't be able to see the token, they won't be able to break into our systems, but when Azure DevOps tries, it will be able to go and request this, and therefore we'll have access. I'm setting the activation date and expiry date here, just so that we've got a record of when this expires, and we can look into this one key vault centralized space and see when everything is going to expire so that we know to renew it. Obviously, you'd probably want to automate that in a real environment. But here you can see, if you've got permission, you can come in and actually see that secret anytime. Generally, you would never access that secret this way again. You're always going to use it through Azure DevOps or some other mechanism. So in Azure DevOps, click on Pipelines and Library, and here we're going to create a variable group to link to that key vault. So we're just going to give it a name of Databricks var group, link secrets from an Azure key vault, and then we need to authorize our subscription. And once that's authorized, we can then select the key vault from the drop down list. Again, it authorizes. So what this is doing is giving permission to the key vault from Azure DevOps. Then we need to select the variable. So all of the variables you select here are then available to your pipelines, and you can create multiple variable groups. You could have one for dev, one for QA, one for prod, and keep them nice and separate, and then just align a variable group to that particular stage rather than to the whole job. So here we're creating the build pipeline. This is exactly the same as in the recent Azure Data Factory pipeline. So all we're going to do is give it a name of build notebook artifact, add a job to publish build artifacts, and we're going to point that at the Git repository. So in this instance, there is no actual build process. We're just purely copying artifacts because they're just scripts. When we get onto the more advanced topics here, we're going to start using Python notebooks. At that point, there will be a process to take the code of the Python, turn it into a Python wheel, and then use that Python wheel as the artifact rather than the code. But in this instance, we don't need to do that. So we're going to set the trigger to enable continuous integration. This means that every time we do a pull request into the master branch, which is specified there, that's going to automatically kick off a build. And here we're going to do save and queue. Because this is the first time, that auto trigger is not going to happen. We've already done the pull request, so we want to manually queue the first one, but next time it's going to happen automatically. And we're going to just next through that, and then it comes onto this build process and just run through it the first time. This is going to create a build artifact that just contains everything that's in the Git repository. So here we can see those jobs running. Job is initialized, it checks out the code, publishes the artifact, and then does some other bits and bobs for Azure DevOps. And when that's finished, the job will complete, and we'll have our artifact. And this artifact we're going to then take and deploy it into 3 different environments. In this instance, those 3 environments are the same DevOps Databricks workspace, but there's no reason they have to be. So if we have different keys for different workspaces, they could be in different regions, we can just set up each of the stages to have a different workspace, possibly deploying and then creating jobs with different clusters. So here we're creating a release pipeline, giving the stage name testing for the first one. Later on we're going to create other stages, but for now we'll leave it blank because what we want to do is clone that testing one once we're completed setting it up. So we're going to call the pipeline notebook release pipeline to show that we're taking the notebook and releasing it in a staged way. Click add an artifact, and then we're going to add in the build. So you can see there I've highlighted, it's actually telling us that it's created something called notebooks. And then again, we're going to enable continuous integration using that little lightning bolt. That means that every time a build finishes, that build will be put into the pipeline to go into our testing, our pre-prod, and our production environments. Then we go to the variables tab and add a variable group and just link up that one we created earlier. It's as simple as that, so we can then just start using those variables within the job. There's no complex setting up of key vault or anything like that. We can just access those because Azure DevOps has permission there, which allows us to access them. So here we're just going to add a PowerShell script. We're using inline. You could just as easily be using a script from a repo or something like that. But in this instance, I'm just doing it inline because it's a nice small script and it's pretty easy, and it demonstrates what we need. So I'm just expanding this out so you can see the whole script on screen. At the top here, it just says where the documentation is for this. That's always handy in your scripts. Then with the file name is where we're copying from. You need to make sure by looking into your artifact, which you can do in Azure DevOps by clicking artifacts, just make sure that this path is correct for your Python file. I had an issue when I was doing this that I'd used a different name, and therefore it wasn't finding that file.
So you can just come in, or you could look in your repository to see what the path is. Under that, we've got the new notebook name. This is what it's going to be called once it gets into Databricks. Beneath that, we've then got the secret setup using the $bracket Databricks bracket. That's getting the variable from the key vault that DevOps is taking care of for us. So it is that easy. We're putting bearer space just because that's what the API requires. Then we're setting the URI of the workspace. You can get this from your Databricks workspace. Beneath that, we then have to encode it into base64. This again is a requirement of the API. So we're reading the file contents and encoding that. Then the body is just putting all these things together. So these are the options for the API. Overwrite is true. Language is Python. That's where you change it for Scala, etc. Here I'm just showing you where you can see the username that's used. So you would need to put your path to set that up, to put it in the right place. Then we convert the body to JSON, again just a requirement of the API, set up the headers, and then invoke REST method just calls the API. So you can copy and paste these bits to do multiples. You could use a for each loop to do all of the files. It's up to you whether you want to do it automatically. We can then click the add button and clone. So this is going to clone the entire job. We're calling it pre-prod. And then once we go into the task there, we'll see the exact same PowerShell script. So here, we're just going to call it a different name. Realistically, in a production environment, you would be sending this to a different Databricks workspace using a different key. And then we're going to create one called production. So you can see here that we're going from testing to pre-prod to production. You can see the lines there, so you can set prerequisites for each of these, and you could have it deploying in parallel to do two different environments. You could have different preconditions and stuff. So here, if you click on the sort of lozenge shape at the beginning, you can then set pre-deployment approvals, gates, all that kind of stuff. So here I'm just going to set a pre-approver, setting it to myself just for the demo purposes, and saving that. So I've only done that on pre-prod, so what's going to happen is it's going to go to testing, then I'm going to be asked to approve the deployment of pre-prod. I did not set anything on production. Obviously I would in real life, but in this instance it's just going to go ahead and deploy it as soon as it finishes the pre-prod. So we then create a release that then takes the build artifact and pulls it into this flow. So we then wait for the agent. The agent then runs the job. Again, does an initialization, downloads the artifact, downloads the secrets from the key vault. If you use the secret, by the way, it just shows up as 3 stars on the logs. So your secrets, even if you explicitly say write host and then write the secret, it just shows up as 3 stars. So then you can see I was asked to approve that. Normally I would wait until I've tested the testing environment, but you can see here that we've now got the imported notebook as per the script. The deployment to pre-prod is in progress, so I'm not going to click into it this time, but you can if you wanted to see all of the fancy text on the screen scrolling past. It looks nice and techy. As soon as that's succeeded, though, you can see it just queues into production because we didn't have any preconditions. But you can see the notebook is now deployed with the pre-prod script, and the production is being deployed. So I'll stress again, do not deploy to the same workspace if you're doing this for real. That's purely for the demo. In reality, you would have different workspaces so that you have full separation between your environments.
So that's the end of the demo for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. As I said at the beginning, please hit the like button below if you enjoyed the video. Also, do subscribe to the channel just so that you don't miss anything in the future. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.